Hey, so Pedro, can you introduce yourself to our audience?
My name is Pedro Correa. I am native from Brazil. I'm a U.S. citizen. I came to the U.S. in 1978 to study, and I got my master's degree in geoscience from the University of Tulsa, and have been working in IT for now 28 years. Currently working on a low-code process and communication automation platform called Papyrus platform. So I have these four daughters that you probably have heard about it already, and I'm very passionate for technology and mainly the part that is now bringing in the human dimension, which I think is long overdue to have the human dimension more in the forefront of technology,
Right.
design, deploy, etc.
Right, great. So thank you for that. So the topic that we have for today is how enterprise RPA platform creates an automated virtual workforce. So since you've been in the IT industry for 28 years now, how do you think RPA, firstly, what is RPA? And in your experience, how do you think it has evolved in recent times?
Okay, I've been working on RPA quite a lot, and initially, it was just you screen scrape what a person would be looking at, and then you would make a program digitize the fields what the person would have digitized herself. So this was the original RPA of 20 years ago, where the objective is to reduce error, human error, by in repetitive activities. And so repetitive activities happen a lot in the past and currently as well. So RPA came up as a relief to reduce mistakes and to repeat activities when the volume was very high, etc. So initially that was pretty good. However, we started having challenges with the evolution of RPA, in which we wanted the customer base wanted more data sources to be available to an RPA workflow, an
Okay.
RPA automation. And they wanted to integrate with another system, so additional logins had to be made. In other words, I think what was meant originally to be very simple and very bread and butter without much complexity that a non-programmer could do became, now I even have seen people putting an I ahead of the RPA acronym to denote intelligent robotic process automation. The intelligent being
How
the
exactly
ability. Yeah,
is that
I'm
the
sorry.
next thing in RPA, the intelligent?
Yes, I think the next thing in RPA is exactly the implementation of that I there, the intelligent RPA. Intelligent RPA would involve a pre-processing to generate an environment in which repetitive things could be automated with the normal RPA. In my view, therefore, it's like a set of concentric circles, like an onion. In the very center, you have the basic, most simple, most primitive RPA, which is
Right.
just right. In the outer layers, you will have more artificial intelligence. You will have more environmental capabilities, like to bring data from different sources, like from a mainframe, from a SAP, from a different environment even, and then apply all the conditional logic, Boolean logic to set up the environment. We are not even running the robotic process automation. Nowadays, you have the ability to put a infinite numbers of robots doing things for you. Coordinating these robots require a tool or a platform. So the leaders in robotic process automation usually provide that tool. However, there's still a lot of API programming, which I think gradually next steps. They will become more lower code, like citizen development, in which a non-IT person will be able to drag and drop components into a canvas area and generate a new automation that will be a robotic automation. Okay, so I think that we're moving gradually toward that direction.
Right. And what are the different types of RPA? So you've already mentioned that intelligent automation is the next thing, but is hybrid automation recommended for an SMB or is it more suited to an enterprise?
Well, I think hybrid automation is it's the proper should be the proper terminology because RPA by itself, the very primitive, just automating repetitive tasks, has very little value in my book for big businesses. However, for a small and medium-sized business in certain value chains, in certain processes, RPA can deliver some benefit for sure. However, the big money, the big ROI, the big return on investment is on the hybrid. Because when you look at the whole ecosystem, you have points where RPA in its primitive form, it's most adequate and inexpensive and will do the job. However, when you look far apart, the ecosystem requires more than the primitive RPA can deliver in the sense of integration, in the sense of referential integrity, in the sense of change management. It's a big restriction of RPA alone, primitive version. So I think that those elements which bring the context of RPA would have to be addressed, and that only with hybrid. And hybrid in that sense, in the sense that I'm giving, just to make sure, it's like a non-RPA automation with RPA automation with intelligent automation. So you look at the ecosystem and say, hey, in these points I can do primitive RPA. On these other value chains, since there are entities that are outside the company, like providers or alliances or distributors or partners, these guys require that I have the IRPA because I need to bring data from them, and the RPA alone would not be able to do that. And then when you further get away from the center of the onion, when you are on the outer cover, and then you say, hey, I need to do much more uh, around the basic kernel of primitive RPA in order to get value from automation. So I think that when you said hybrid RPA, I think that is the proper name of robotic process automation because that would include both the primitive RPA from the old times of just screen scraping and repetitive tasks, the logical in which you apply Boolean conditional logic to set up the environment where the primitive RPA would run, and the bigger picture where you have a whole initiative or program in which you have strategic goals to meet, in which you have phased implementation, where in the beginning for example, you would include all the SAP data. And then on the second stage, you will also include data from the mainframe, which you're not using prior. So that approach of a phased automation, like a phased hybrid robotic process automation, it's, in my view, the proper way to go because it's scalable. You can do little bitty things and you can do big enterprise.
Okay. So in terms of scalability, is it more suited like an enterprise, for instance, is better able to undertake this procedure as opposed to some firm that is just starting out or is just in like medium to small scale enterprise?
Well, that's a good question because scalability always bears on the decision-making structure of the company. So if you have a very large company, but the decision-making process is agile and the middle level managers and leaders have authority to make decisions that would allow for, a big enterprise to have agility and to be able to address very small uh, processes, very restricted scoped processes than that they would otherwise. If they're very rigid, and they have a very strong hierarchical approach for decision making, that would make it almost they would not be able to have the flexibility required to scale well. So one department, like a one credit analysis department, has one RPA flow that they developed to do a specific thing, and that has worked great. But now they wanted to bring it to other areas that deal with credit, and that would require upper stakeholder decision. If that decision is too lengthy, it's too complex, it involves too many approvers, that would not happen. So scalability becomes difficult in enterprises in which the decision-making structure is tilted and very non-flexible. However, on the other hand, when you talk about small or mid-sized companies, usually their decision-making process is faster, more agile. So the scalability obstacles they encounter are not as severe as they are when you're talking about a big enterprise with more than 2, 3,000, 5,000 employees. So when you talk about 500, 600 employees, I think the decision-making process is simpler. I think that the benefit of a certain investment or an initiative such as that would be easily observed and easily without all the politics. I think that would be the main reason. So scalability there
Right.
would be a measure of the flexibility of the decision making, how much political these decisions are, and how much they are just focused on
Okay.
get the bottom line.
And speaking of an agile decision making process, often businesses are left wondering what exactly they should automate. So, how can they develop a framework to leverage the full power of RPA?
What to automate? It's always part of the initial planning, strategic planning process. And unfortunately, many organizations cut through that and shortcuts and all that. And that it's one of the reasons why I think RPA is not as stable in the market as it should be, because people either lazy or they don't believe on a very detailed plan. In my book, What to Automate First, that phased sequence, it's the most important critical factor because you need to get buy-in from the cultural, institutional level. You need to, therefore, to have a quick win in which the benefits are clearly, easily understood. So we're talking about people-related factors, not technology. So to answer your question, how would a company, if they ask me, okay, what do I select to automate first? I think the criteria should be all focusing on perception, on perceived value, perceived investment, on perceived how well we're going to be positioned, how much more competitive are we going to be being able to do this. If the answers to these questions, oh, not too much, oh yeah, it's interesting, it's just a pet project of Joe Blow or somebody, that's not going to be the best way to start. The best way to start, therefore, is the big bang, the big benefit, a great perception. Hey, look how innovative and creative we are. We are using the latest technology, and here's the result, and such, etc. So I think it's endo marketing, okay, generating positive perceptions towards the automation effort and personalizing the value. In other words, it's not just a big value to corporate XYZ, but it's also great for John Smith, who is the manager of that effort, and now he's going to be able to put on his resume that he was a leader of an effort that brought such and such benefits. In other words, you need to personalize the value of the technology instead of just letting it at the institutional level. So the person may ask, okay, what is in it for me? Why would I have to put all this effort in learning new ways to do things so to benefit the company? What do I get? Oh, do you keep your job? Well, is that is that enough? You know, so if you say, hey, what do I get? I get to put in my resume that I have been working with RPA, that I've led a project, that it was successful, that there you can ask the X or Y as a reference, and that in my resume is going to make me more marketable. It's going to amplify and enrich my professional history. Therefore, it's valuable. So I think that to select where to start, you need to take all that into consideration, much more than the actual technology itself. I think it's a people thing because people can make it work, and also people can make it fail miserably if they are not convinced, if they're not considered, if they're not persuaded, if their needs and wants and desires are not contemplated by.
Okay, so just circling around the topic again, and in very simple terms, what does an enterprise RPA platform mean for business exactly? Is it more of a machine thing or is it more of a human centered thing?
Well, like I said, I think it, in my opinion, is more of a human thing. Okay, it was generated originally, historically, RPA came about to reduce human hair error.
Right.
Okay, and repetitive tasks. So it started with human, and I think it will be always a human topic, if you will, because in the long run, it is a complement. It's not meant to replace the human being. Of course, if you're talking about stamps, like I remember one of my old uncles. That was his job. He worked in the post office in Brazil, and his job was to stamp, and that's his instrument.
Yeah.
It's like that's all he did was stamp. Well, that job is no longer available because you can do that electronically. So for sure, some jobs will be, ended because of technology. But the decision making, the exception handling, the things that I told you about change. Change, it's an element. Whenever you put people and technology together, change challenges all the connections. Change challenges all the human machine interfaces. So for a company to have an RPA platform in which they could, in one extreme, take care of very mundane, repetitive processes by automating parts of the tasks and maybe letting the human just approving the final result or monitoring sporadically to make sure things are working according to expectations. That the idea that it's a much better approach than to expect that RPA will, reduce your staff in tremendous numbers. So I think that the executives of large companies should see an RPA platform as an opportunity to, number one, retrain and enhance their team's capabilities because now they will have more time to learn new things since part of their job is going to be automated. Second, they have the ability to detect places in the value chain of their business in which intervention is more likely to bring big benefit. Because when you just have a string of robotic process automations without intelligence, without a context, without a big picture, you run the risk of, for example, of using data that comes from an outside context that would pollute, for example, your reports, that would bias your predictions, that would interfere on your rationale because you brought data that should not be brought in because somebody put that in the RPA without proper planning, without proper environmental setup. That the perception of the onion. RPA primitive in the very center is very limited, very restricted. The real value of automation is when you have the whole picture, when you can ensure the truthness of the data you're using to guarantee that your results are not going to be biased, when you can prepare the ideal environment for execution, and when you have the visibility of the business regarding what is it that we're doing and what is it that we are getting on the end of the day as far as
Right. And taking a more current approach, in your opinion, has the pandemic created an opportunity or obstacle for RPA's wide scale adoption?
well, once we don't interact in person, the interaction now is electronic. RPA has had its scope expanded because before some things required face-to-face interaction, and then the RPA would start executing. Now, since that face-to-face interaction is not possible, the RPA, the original scope of the original RPA has to be expanded to include the decisions that need to be made prior.
Yeah, how do you think the RPA market is expected to grow in the coming years? And then there are people, right? There are employees who think that a robotic process automation is going to replace humans soon. So, what do you think businesses can do to work on these misconceptions?
Yeah, well, I think that reskilling, I think that it's an expansion of the skill, the training, enablement of their staff. Okay. And I think that some risk mitigation needs to be included. For example, RPA raises some risks that were not so critical. For example, when you commit one mistake and you're doing something manually, maybe you do it 2 or 3 times and then you detect the mistake. When you commit a mistake with an RPA, you only detect it after 5,000 repetitions. And I think that as RPA evolves, the maturity of the companies regarding this vision that I provided, which the human dimension, it's more uh, critical. It's contemplated and valued in the planning, in the design of the RPA automations themselves. I think that that's a way to evolve, to make RPA more human driven. And that means reskilling, enhancing the skill set of your staff
Okay.
so that they know how to use RPA within the constraints that RPA in each instance will have. And that requires knowledge. It's not intuitively available to anyone doing RPA. You need to understand, you need to study that kind of thing. And the other one is more and more the inclusion of artificial intelligence and machine learning into RPA value chain, if you will, in which the risks go back into data quality. The risks go back into not taking into consideration the observer's point of view. The risk goes back into getting stuck in a simple RPA just because we don't want to be messing around with something that is working, and because of that you don't enhance, you don't grow. So I think that the RPA will evolve each time, being more intelligent, each time including more and more artificial intelligence and machine learning. But in my warning point of view, in my alert, I think we need to be careful because we don't want to amplify the existing risks that RPA presents today.
Right.
just by the anxiety to, oh, I want to do RPA, I want to do RPA, and then you don't do a proper training, you don't take into consideration proper strategic alignment. And like I told you, the great question you asked, how to determine which are the first projects, how do I start? Which, in my view, it's all about the human dimension. It's bringing your staff with you as an RPA leader. Say, hey, I'm bringing something new. It's going to bother everybody. It's going to break a lot of rules. It's going to be exceptional to every person in this company. However, it's going to be great. It's going to be a good trip. And on the other side of the trip, we all going to get it. And that message is something very important.
Right. All right, Pedro, thank you for joining us on BetterTech, and thank you so much for your insights around RPA.
My pleasure. Please keep in touch.